So today's concept is what is servlets. So before starting the servlet, what is JDBC? So before going to servlets, I just want to know what is JDBC. JDBC is a translator. JDBC is a specification, that is a set of rules and regulations given by Sun Microsystems to database vendors, right? And JDBC is an API. Though it's the same way, here we have a servlets also. So what is servlets? You can say servlets is a server side programming. Servlet is a specification, that is whatever the servlet program you're writing, you will write in a server. So the server vendors has been given a set of rules by the Sun Microsystem, because Java doesn't have any methods which are executed by the server. Okay, in order to execute from the server, the Sun Microsystem has given a set of rules and regulations to all the server vendors. So a set of rules and regulations given by Sun Microsystem to server vendors, you can say. And servlet is a API also, we can say. So what is the purpose of the server side programming? Consider that I am having a HTML page for login. A login page is there. So in this login page, like I have two text box, username and password. One is username and next is password. So based on that, I just want to perform action. Okay, and this particular thing is known as front end. Front end is nothing but what you are able to see, like .html can be used, or .css or .js or .jsp can use for the front end things. Okay, and lot of other things are there. For the basic part, we'll see this here. After the particular front end, you have a web container. A web container is used for the interaction between the front end and the back end. So here you can say it as a web container. So what is a web container? We'll see. Now after that web container, we have a database. Okay, what is database? It's a backend, you can say. Like what we have, you can say backend. And what are the language we use for the backend? In the sense, Oracle is there, MySQL is there, then SQL Server is there. So a lot of particular technologies are there. We can use any of these technologies. Okay, so now the front end is there and the back end is there. In between the front end and back end, there is a web container. So what the web container consists of? It has a particular, you can say, web server, and this web server again contains, like after the web server, we have a server side programming written, or you can say here servlet and JSP, both the things are there. Servlet is one thing and JSP is another thing. You can say web server, and here we have servlet or server side technology. So server side programming also, you can say anything you can mention. And this server side programming can be achieved by ASP.NET, ADO.NET and servlets in JSP or PHP. For Java we have to use this servlet and JSP. So you can call it as servlet engine or JSP engine, you can say. Okay, so here the thing, it's a servlet engine, it's a JSP engine. Engines are nothing but which executes the servlets. JSP is nothing but which executes the JSP. Now if I want to log in into my particular Facebook account or Gmail account or to the home page, you have to first give the details, right? So I'll give it as username and password. Okay, so here there will be username will be there and a password will be there. Now when I say login, what will happen? This login will be clicked and based on the login some action must be performed, right? So login is there. When I click this login, whatever the username I have given, it must be taken and is given to the web server. So the client request is handled by the web server first. So it's taking all the particular values. And here we have a particular two types of request. Those are nothing but first is like we have static request and dynamic request, and the front end or the web page can also be known as static page or dynamic page. So what's the difference between static page and dynamic page? Static page is nothing but the information doesn't change. Like if you see your college website, in that college website you will be having contact us. So every time if I click the contact us, the same page will get generated, like the same page will be shown, right? Or you can consider a Wikipedia link. So if you search in the wiki, that link will contain the same information every time you search. So those kind of requests are nothing but static pages, you can say. And if you have a particular request like a result, you're seeing your result, you are given the hall ticket. Based on the hall ticket, the result page will be generated. And for every particular student, the hall ticket will be different and the result will be different. So those are nothing but dynamic pages which change based upon the user input. So based on the user input, it changes every time. Okay, and after that, like here, static request is nothing but can be handled directly by the web server. Means web server handles static request. It cannot handle dynamic request. Okay, so you have to understand that if a request given by the user is a static request, web server will directly interact, it will give it, but it cannot handle the dynamic request. So username and password must be verified in the database. So web server cannot interact with the database directly. or it cannot generate a dynamic page. So the first thing, a dynamic page is required, and based on the dynamic page, here the user homepage will be decided, right? So web server values will be given to the servlet engine. All the values has been given to the servlet engine. Now servlet engine has to check the values in the database table, right? So servlet engine has to interact directly with the database, but servlets can't interact with the database. The only reason why we are using servlets is nothing but it generates a dynamic page which is not handled by the web server. That's the reason we are using the servlets. So if I want to interact with the database, again we'll take the help of JDBC. Why JDBC? In the sense, JDBC is a translator which converts the Java like methods into the database understandable commands. So what we have here, JDBC, and the JDBC is used for that particular purpose. Okay. So next thing, whatever the input you have given is given to the JDBC, and that JDBC sends that request to the database. Database will return the objects, then that object is given to the JDBC, and JDBC is giving that object to the servlet engine. So servlet engine will create a dynamic page now. So this is a dynamic page. So based on the input, the dynamic page will be generated, and this dynamic page is given to the web server. And what the web server will do? The web server will just give this page to the user. So home page is given to the user. So this is the process going on for every request we make in the website or in the login page. Okay, so servlet and JSP are similar. So what's the difference between servlets and JSP? At the introduction of JSP engine we'll see. Okay, till that time you have to understand that web container has both web server and the server side programming, but web server cannot handle the dynamic request. For that reason we are using the server side programming. And server side programming consists of servlet and the JSP engine, and it is used to generate only the dynamic pages, but they can't interact with the database. So in order to interact with the database, again we have to know about JDBC. So if you see, first you should have an idea about HTML form tag and the table tags, one terminology or one technology. Second, you should know about the servlets, which we are going to learn now. Third, you should know what is JDBC technology, like what are the previous classes we have done, statement and prepared statement used to send the data, like by using execute update or execute query. And third, how the database works, what are the commands we write. Either Oracle or MySQL will be fine, right? So in this scenario, multiple technologies knowledge will be there, and those multiple technologies will be written in a single particular location to generate a dynamic page as well as to have a web application. So in order to develop the web application, we should know all these technologies. Okay, so next thing, what is servlets? We have seen servlet is an API. Servlet is a server side programming. Servlet is a specification. And what the servlet is doing, it's taking the request from the particular web server, it processing the request to the database using the JDBC, it gets the response from the database using the JDBC, and it generates a dynamic page, and this dynamic page is given to the web server. So servlet functionalities. Simple. First, it takes the request from the web server. Second, it processes the request through JDBC in to database. Response from the database using JDBC. And fourth one is what? It generates the dynamic page and gives it to web server. And web server is handing over the web page to the user or the client. So these are the functionalities of a servlet or a servlet engine, you can say. Okay, and servlet is an API, I said. So what are the APIs you are having is nothing but Java X dot servlet dot servlet. So servlet is a particular package, it's an API. Along with that, it's an interface. So what is servlet interface, we'll see. Before that, the next package will be like servlet dot http dot start. And now among these two packages, we'll be mostly using this HTTP 99.99%. But before that, we should know what are the drawbacks of this javax.servlet. So first I'll tell about this, then we'll come to the introduction of this javax.servlet.htp. Okay, now servlet is an API, servlet is a package, servlet is an interface, servlet is a specification, servlet is a server-side programming. Okay, and servlet, main purpose of servlet is what? Servlet is used to generate dynamic pages. Simple. Apart from that, we have JDBC front end and database technologies which we need to know. Okay, and here we have to know that JVM used to execute the program before servlets, you can say. Now who is executing our program? Server or the servlet engine, you can say, right? So we don't write public static void main from servlet onwards. We don't write public static void main from servlets concept. Okay, so every time it should be a particular server or servlet engine which executes our code. So how can we say a class as servlet class? You should identify, right? Suppose if I just write down like a class my servlet, can you say it as a servlet class? No, because here if you want to say any class as a servlet class, the class must implement or implements servlet interface. Means a class must implement a class must implement a servlet interface. Okay, then only we can say it as a servlet class. Understood. So here that my servlet implements a servlet. Then implements means it's a interface. How to check that thing? Java p space. So if I want to use this particular servlet package, then we have to import java dot javax dot servlet dot servlet or star, right? So where I got this package from? This is not developed by Java. This has been developed by the server vendor. Similar to OJDBC 14 in database or JDBC, okay, where it has been developed by database vendors. The same way servlet-api.jar in servlets is developed by server vendors. So where you can find this particular servlet API means once I install a particular Tomcat, then that particular Tomcat consists of lib folder. Like suppose for example I have installed a Tomcat in my E drive, where here you can see this Tomcat is there. In this Tomcat you will be having a bin to start the particular server, and you will be having a lib which has the library files, and you will be having a web apps which is the web application folder which contains the web application. So how you got this means when you install the software you will get this particular scenario, and here the lib consists of lot of APIs. In that we need servlet-API. So the servlet-API can be used if we set the class path. So class path can be set in two ways. One is temporary, next is permanent. Okay. So I'll send you this software. Along with that software, I'll send you a video where you can see the video. According to the video, you can install the particular Tomcat. So try to see the video properly, because we have to change the port number, we have to give the username and password, and we have to change the path where Tomcat is getting installed. Don't install Tomcat in this particular program files in C drive. Above, like before the program files, it will be fine. Don't install the Tomcat here like Apache Software Foundation. It's not required here. Try to install it outside the program files. Why? Because in this program files, here OS operating system related files will be there, and this operating system will not allow to modify the notepad files in this area, in this particular folders. So it's not possible to change or do any modification afterwards. For that reason, you have to make sure that install the Tomcat outside the program files so that you can modify the files anytime. Okay. And here, how can you say a servlet class as a like a myServlet class as a servlet when it implements a servlet interface? If a class implements a servlet, then it is known as a servlet class. Okay. And here, so this class must implement interface servlet. So what are the particular methods are there in that interface, we have to see. Okay. So Here open the particular command prompt, just say java p space java x dot servlet dot servlet interface. See, first servlet is a package, S is small. Second, servlet S is capital because it's a interface. Then if you just click enter, here you will be having methods. And these methods must be implemented inside the my servlet. Because we know that if a class implements a servlet, the servlet interface contains 5 abstract methods, and those 5 abstract methods must be implemented in the myServlet class. It is not optional. Second, the interface, we can't create any object, but we can create the reference for them. Third, here if the methods whatever we are implementing are by default public inside the servlet interface, then in myServlet also the overridden methods must be assigned as public. These are the rules of interface. And coming to this myServlet, the public static void main is not written in the servlet class. So from now onwards you won't see the public static void main because JVM is not executing our particular program. And who is executing our program then? The servlet class is executed by servlet engine, right? So how the servlet engine will come to know that which method it has to execute? It will know based on the lifecycle methods, and this lifecycle methods will have some lifecycle phases. So what are the lifecycle methods you have? First is public void init, and the parameter will be servlet config. So we'll see factory methods from now onwards. A method which generates an object as well as a method whose parameter is nothing but a like object, a reference. So a class name, abstract class name or interface. So in this you have to pass the object of servlet config, then only it will get executed. Without that it won't execute. Okay, and here second thing, the second lifecycle method is nothing but public void service, where you have servlet request and request object, servlet response object, and the third thing is nothing but public void destroy. So you have to understand that if you write these three methods, then the servlet will execute one after the other. For that we have the lifecycle phases, how these methods are getting executed and how the object is getting generated for a myServlet. So in this myServlet class we have to implement, because we have first method is known as init, whose parameter is a servlet config, and second thing is known as get servlet config, whose return type is a servlet config. Means get servlet is a, config is a factory method, instance factory method. And third method is nothing but a service, whose parameter is a servlet request and servlet response. And the fourth one is nothing but the get servlet info, whose return type is a string. So here the return types are required whenever you have a return. And here void destroy, the fifth and the final method of servlet interface. All these methods must be overridden in the myServlet class. It's mandatory. So here First method will be public void init. In this we have a servlet config is a reference here, okay, and this reference will take only object. And after this init method, if you see, we have the get servlet config, and for the get servlet config you'll be having public servlet config as a return type and get servlet config as the method, and return null because we are not returning any object, right? So I'm just saying return null. Okay, next after that we have the third method known as service, which has servlet request and servlet response parameter, right? So here we'll say public void service, servlet request will be there, that is request object, and servlet response will be there, that will be response object. And if you see, this method is trying to it throws servlet exception and IO exception. So we have to write that throws keyword to say servlet exception and IO exception. That's a public void service method. I'm not implementing anything. In the next class we'll see what is, like, how the implementation is done. The next thing will be public void, not void, you can say get servlet info whose return type is string. So string will be there, get servlet info, right? So return, what you have to return here, you have to return null. And if you see, the last method will be public void destroy. So public void destroy. So this class, my servlet class, must be public. Till now we haven't seen that rule, but here it's mandatory that whatever the servlet class we are using, that class must be public so that servlet engine can access it from anywhere. Okay, and here I'm saving it as my servlet dot java. Okay, so in E drive java sk my servlet dot java, if you open that E drive, cd space java sk java c space my servlet dot java. So if I compile now, there is no error. Yeah, we got the error because we haven't imported the IO exception. Import java dot IO dot star. So if I compile now, this java c space my servlet dot java is getting compiled. So there is no error. So without any implementation, we can't write anything. And JVM will not execute the servlet. Don't ever run the servlet here, my servlet, because it will give public static void main is not there. And here servlet engine will execute this particular servlet class. Okay, so for that we need an object, right? In order to call these methods also, we are not calling any method now again. It's done by the servlet engine. So if you see from the servlets, the programmer just he will implement the methods, and internally server will call one after the other. Like the methods will be called by the server one after the other. And for that we need an object. So what is an object? You can say of my servlet class here. So how to generate the object of my servlet class? Here we can't use any new keyword, and here we are not writing any public static void main. So for that we have life cycle phases. And before going to the life cycle phases, like what are those? Doesn't exists. Second, here you can say instantiation. Initialization. Servicing phase. Destroy phase. So these are the 5 phases of servlets. And why we require these phases means we need the object. Then only you can call these methods. And in it, what you are trying to write. Here, in the lifecycle methods, the init will contain the database connectivity code. And in the service, you will have the request handling and response generation. Request handling and response generation code. And in this destroy, you will have like database connectivity code is there, right? That will be destroyed. Database object or connectivity will be destroyed. So in the life cycle, you have to understand that when a company is established, it requires a website or web application. So it will host a particular website in the server. For that, it needs a database. And between the web application and the database, a one-time database connectivity will be done. So the servlet config or this init method is executed once. Means in the life cycle of a servlet, only one time will execute the init method because the connectivity will happen only once. And after that, the service method will execute repeated number of times for every request of a user. Suppose if I give a username and password and clicks login, so it's a request and response generation which will be handled by the service. If a third person is trying to log in, again his details will be taken and request and response generation will be done. So that is done entirely by the service. And when a company is destroyed, or you can say company like removing the particular website, then database connectivity also will be destroyed, or the database object also will be cleared or removed, you can say. And the next thing will be life cycle phases. So what are the life cycle phases means? When I compile the dot class like dot java file, I'll get a dot class file, right? So java xk my servlet. This dot class file is in the doesn't exist phase because there is no memory for the class. So my servlet dot class file is in doesn't exist phase, which requires memory. So we need a memory for the servlet class, that is a doesn't exist. And in the instantiation phase, the memory is getting allocated. How means, you know, class dot for name. This dot class file is in the hard disk, and in the hard disk means the memory is not getting allocated. It should be shifted to the server memory. You have to understand that here we are not executing in the RAM, we are executing in the server. So to shift that particular dot class file, we use the class dot for name, which shifts the dot class file. Here you can say my servlet dot class. Okay, and when you call this particular my servlet without the dot class, it will return the particular class name as a reference, right? So what that C consists of, my servlet class name, And if you call a method known as new instance, where you got this new instance means you can see java p space java dot lang dot class. So a predefined class is there. Inside that predefined class we have a method known as new instance. New instance is a method which generates object of a class, like by using which class name we are calling the method. Like here t is unknown, like generic you can say. That object will be generated when you call this particular c dot new instance. Means whatever c consists of name, for that name object is getting generated, we can say. Now after this object, so in installation phase what is happening? Object creation is done in instantiation phase for my servlet. Okay, and next thing will be what? Initialization phase. So in this initialization phase, init method will be executed. So in order to execute the init method, we need the servlet config object. Why? Because if a method is called, along with the method the parameter must be passed. If it is a integer, we have to pass an integer parameter. If it is a float, you have to pass float. But here it's a reference of servlet config type. So we need to pass an object of servlet config in order to call the init method. So in this initialization phase, servlet engine will create the servlet config object and calls the init method. So why it's doing that means initialization phase it has to execute the init method. And what you're writing in the init? In the init we are writing the database connectivity code. Okay. In init method we write the database connectivity code. And after this we have servicing phase. So what you have to do in servicing phase, you have to call the service method, but it has request parameter, right? And it has response parameter also. So who will create the objects now? Everything is done by the servlet engine here only. He will create the, it will create the object and it will call the method. Servlet engine will create servlet request object and servlet response object and calls the service method. So in service method what you are writing here? In service method request processing and response generation code is written, right? And now after this we have destroy phase. Simple thing to, like, servlet engine only calls this method also. So we are not calling anything. Servlet engine calls the destroy phase and destroy what we write in destroy method, we write database, what you can say, database connectivity will be destroyed. Okay, so simple thing, from servlet onwards you won't, the programmer will not call the methods like these particular methods: init, service and destroy. These are the lifecycle methods. These must be executed by the server. So in order to execute them, it requires the object for the my servlet. For that we have the phases. In the phases, first phase will be doesn't exist, where my servlet dot class will be generated and it doesn't have any memory. And the instantiation phase will create that particular object by shifting the dot class file from hard disk to server, and by calling a method known as new instance which generates the object of the class. And after the object creation is done, instantiation phase for my servlet dot class file, we can call the methods like init or the destroy or the service. So this init method is called by the servlet engine itself. But in order to call it, we need a servlet engine object, sorry, servlet config object, which is generated by servlet engine. So every object is created by the servlet engine itself. So here, after writing all these phases, like after completing all these phases, one web application cycle has been completed. And in this, init is executed only once, destroy is executed only once, at the starting, at the ending, and service is a method which gets executed a repeated number of times based on every request and every particular response, for every response. Understood? So that's it for entire servlet introduction, as well as servlet class, servlet lifecycle and servlet lifecycle phases. Okay, so in the next application, in the next class, we'll see a starting servlet web application. Before that, try to install the Tomcat server, which is 7.0 version. Make sure when your JDK is 1.7, install 7.0, it's better. And when your JDK is 1.8, try to install Tomcat 8. Okay, version compatibility will be there. And next thing, try to set the class path as we have set for the ojdbc14.jar file, and we'll send you the video along with the software which consists of how to install and how to set the path. Okay,